it's Mo. Welcome back to another episode of What I Read in a Week, what I read last week. If I could put these out on Friday, maybe we'll call them Friday Reads, maybe we'll call them Recent Reads. I think that's the thing that I need the most help with now from you, is to let me know what you think these videos should be called. Last week was the first time that I did one of these videos, and it's just a wrap-up of the books that I've read throughout the week so that my end of month wrap-up isn't excruciatingly long. And I got so much good feedback, and I appreciate it so much to those who watched and to those who commented on this type of video, and it seemed like people are liking it, so I'm glad to continue. It's definitely an experiment. I can't guarantee that they will always go on like this, but for now, we're gonna give it a try. One of my biggest issues with this is turnaround time, and because I had to start after February, it could be that there's a delay somewhere in there to make it so that they're easier to edit. I didn't get out the first episode as early as I would have liked, but we'll see about this episode. The other thing that I would like for these videos is to make them a little bit more vlog style, but this week has been kicking my butt because there's a lot of stuff going on at work and it was daylight savings. I'm terrible at daylight savings. I really wish the daylight savings didn't exist or whatever. I don't care what time period we leave it on. I just want it to be like left alone because it always manages to throw me off, jar me, either in the fall or in the spring. So I did get out this week a little bit, and there were things going on. I went to a book sale, actually the first book sale since starting the Read What You Own project, because I did finish my Read What You Own project last week on Saturday, and then I immediately went to a book sale, which I knew was going to happen. That was why I finished it on that day. You will see more of my thoughts on the Read What You Own, and you will see more of a wrap-up for that coming soon, which reminds me I have to film that. I didn't get any footage of the book sale, so I would like to incorporate these a little bit more into my reading. And even this week there were books that I read that I was like, oh, I want to talk about this right now. If I can get into the habit of like turning on the camera immediately and talking about them, I will try to do that. But that didn't really work for me when I was doing my long monthly reading wrap-ups, so I don't know if it'll really work with me doing these weekly reading wrap-ups. As I mentioned in that first video, in the last video like this, I want to try to keep these like under 20 minutes, and I did read more books, quite a few more books this week than last week, so let's get started. The next book that I finished in March was Made in Korea #1. This is written by Jeremy Holt, illustrated by George Schall, and lettered by Adam Wallet. This is a graphic novel. It's a collection of the first 6 issues of Made in Korea, and our story starts out in Korea with a man working at some kind of tech company, and we see that he has made some sort of discovery, and he decides to hide this discovery in a proxy. We learn that a family from Texas has received this proxy. You're kind of dropped into this future time where it seems like people can't have children. It's never fully explained. In this first collected edition, they get proxies, which are basically like AI, intelligent, childlike beings, androids that live in their homes and that they treat as children. But right off the bat, our Texas couple realizes that their proxy is quite a bit different than what they were expecting, what normal proxies are. So they do things like enroll her in school, which has never happened before. Through that, we see people's different reaction to proxies, and the whole time we're also with our creator of this proxy, and he's coming to America. He decides that it's time for him to take over care of the proxy. This book doesn't really explain much. We start off meeting our scientist, our technician. We meet our proxy, Jesse, and the family that adopts Jesse, and we learn that Jesse is different than other proxies and maybe other people. But we don't really know what's going to happen from there, but there is quite a bit of a turn at the very end of this, and the last page of this book definitely makes you want to keep reading. It definitely leaves you on a cliffhanger. I found this book, I think, at a library book sale, and I just thought it was interesting. The ending definitely has me wanting to read more, but I think I would just find these when I could find them. I'm not gonna like go out looking for them per se, but I think this was a really fun story, and the thing that I was really surprised about and the thing that I really liked about it was that this is a trans story and a queer story. So I did not know that. I was not expecting that. I didn't realize that the author is possibly trans, possibly non-binary, and that the artist is possibly trans, possibly non-binary. So I'm not sure. I didn't look into those people, but just from the vibes that I got and the story and their bios in the back, the next book that I finished in March, I hinted about last video, which is A Fatal Grace by Louise Penny. This is the second in the Inspector Gamache series, and because I read 6.5 in this series last week, I had mentioned that I was going to talk about this. After reading Hangman, which was 6.5, which was a novella, I did decide that I wanted to read the second one in this series. Definitely Hangman was made to be an easy read, and these books are less easy to read than that, but they are still very compelling. They are very propulsive. You do want to read them. You do want to find out what happens. I read the first in the series several years ago, Still Life, and I read that one physically, I believe. This one I read on audio, and I really enjoyed it. I liked the audio narration, and I really liked being back with these characters. I do think that I did myself a disservice, though, because I did watch 1 or 2 episodes of the series with Alfred Molina, and it spoils this book. Someone told me that when I was watching the series. I think it was Kevy maybe mentioned that it spoils it, and I was like, oh, by the time I read that book, I'll have forgotten. No, I did not forget. I definitely was spoiled for this book. I remembered exactly what happened, or pretty much exactly. Actually, it was more fun to read A Fatal Grace and remember what happened in Still Life, because I didn't remember what happened in that one. Piecing it together from reading this was kind of fun. In the end, I really did enjoy this, and it did make me want to continue on with the series. And something I will say about the show, the Three Pines show, is that I think they did a really good job of transitioning certain characters to be Indigenous characters, making the Indigenous stories of Canada relevant in these mysteries, because these mysteries were written in like the early 2000s, the early 2010s. They might touch on that later, but like in this first 2 books, they don't touch on it very much. So I think that the TV show did a really good job of putting that in there. Really, the only thing you need to know about these books is that Inspector Gamache, who is this wonderful mentoring police detective, ends up solving crimes in an idyllic small town of Three Pines. If you're interested in quaint murder villages, if you're interested in cozy mysteries, if you're interested in small town drama, I would definitely recommend picking them up. The next book that I finished in March was The Shape of Water by Andrea Camilleri, and this is a translated crime/mystery book. This was translated from the Italian by Stephen Sartorelli. I also read this book on audio, and I'm so glad that I did, because I did really like the audiobook, and it was super quick, and I think I might have DNF'd this if I hadn't been reading it on audio. Partly because I didn't realize that this was written in the 90s, and so there were a lot of instances of different language and tropes used, and ways that people were described, and ways that the male gaze entered into this text that might have made me DNF it, but because I was reading it on audio and it was so short and it was so quick, it was really easy to get through, and then by the end I was really glad that I had read it. These books are short too, like the type is big, they're all told in like kind of little vignettes. There's chapters as well, but even within the chapters, they're broken up into smaller sections, and then there's a lot of dialogue in this. This is the first in a series starring Inspector Montalbano, and he works in like a very corrupt 1990s Italian city. So he's dealing with the mob. He's dealing with people slashing the tires of the Italian police. He's dealing with corruption in every form of government, from the garbage people to the police to whatever else. In this one, two garbage men find a body. They immediately recognize the body, and then they make some decisions before they alert the police that leads into a larger mystery. Inspector Montalbano sometimes also has to add to this corruption by using his judgment to make certain calls in his job, and we see that in this very first book. This book fulfilled all three prompts for March Mystery Madness this year. There are three prompts. I think one is to read a book set in a different continent from where you live. The next prompt is to read a book by an author from a different country than you live in, and the third is to read a translated work of mystery. So this one fulfills all of those. This is another one that when I first started reading it, I was like, oh, I'm probably not going to continue on with it. I'll continue on with it. This one was fun. For both of these mysteries, though, I don't think I need the physical copies. I really like these copies. I like the floppiness of them, and I like the heft of them, and I like the covers. I mean, these are fun. They're floppy. I don't need to own these because I think if I was ever going to revisit them, I would revisit them on audio. Next in March was the book that I should have put on the camera right away to talk to you about, and that is Sin by the poet Ai. So this is a collection of poetry that was written in the 80s by a Japanese Black Native American poet who called herself Ai. Sometimes she goes by Ai Ogawa, sometimes she goes by her original name, but mostly she just goes by Ai. And this was a really interesting collection of poetry. This was one that I picked up totally randomly at a library book sale or at a used bookstore, and I fell in love with this collection of poetry. It reminded me a lot of one of my favorite books from 2025, which was The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart by Gabrielle Cavalcolresi, I think the author's name is, and this poetry felt a lot like that because in The Last Time I Saw Amelia Earhart, there are poems that tell a story. So although I would consider and classify all poetry nonfiction, I think that these two collections speak to each other because they are both nonfiction and fiction. They are telling a tale, eliciting emotion and eliciting response from the reader because they're told in a fictional way. The last time I saw Amelia Earhart felt like horror to me because it felt so suspenseful, it felt so engaging, it felt so riveting, and I always felt on the edge of my seat in every poem with that book. Sin felt like horror to me because there are a lot of horror topics in this. Some of the stories that Ai tells are about murder, some of them are about sexual assault, some of them are about lust, some of them are about death, some of them are about life, some of them are about getting old, some of them are told from a male perspective, some are told from a female perspective, some are told from a perspective that you're not sure. Like, this felt like horror to me because it felt suspenseful and it felt unsteady. Each poem might contain a horrific element, and I just really, really enjoyed it. For something I've never heard of, for something that I picked up on an absolute whim, I'm so glad that I did, and I would definitely read more from this author. Similar to the last time I saw Amelia Earhart, I might look at some used bookstores and buy more works from this author. So if you're interested in poetry that breaks those boundaries, I would definitely highly recommend. I read Searching for Seraphim, a nonfiction book that I got from Hoopla. It was a instant borrow or a bonus borrow. Searching for Seraphim, The Life and Legacy of Seraphim Joe Fortes by Ruby Smith Diaz, and it was narrated by Michelle Walker. And this is a book about Ruby Diaz discovering this Black Canadian historical figure, Seraphim Fortes, and discovering his story and delving into it and trying to figure out why there is not much on the life of not only this man, but historic Black Canadians in general. Seraphim was originally from Trinidad and Tobago, Trinidad, left his family at a young age, and he went sailing. he ended up in England, and from there he took a ship to continue his sailing journey. This is in the late 1800s, so definitely slavery and racism, Black people not being full citizens in many countries still exists. I mean, I know it still exists, but in this story it's very recent that enslaved people are free and there's still a lot of segregation everywhere. So he ends up on this ship. This ship ends up going to Vancouver, and then he spends the rest of his life in Vancouver, and he becomes a lifeguard. So he becomes a lifeguard for a beach that was segregated. There were times when white people were at this beach. There were times when Black people were at this beach, even though there were not very many Black people. There were times when Asian Canadian people were at this beach, and then it was segregated between men and women because this was a time when men and women didn't go to the beach at the same time in the same place. This Trinidadian Black man really had a very unique role in society where he saved multiple white people from drowning and became a local hero and generally a hero in his community and in a larger Canada context. But he still faced terrible racism. He still faced segregation. He still faced being portrayed as a down south Black man. He still was called the N-word. He still had to deal with all those things. And although he became a constable, which no Black person had before, and although he had to work directly with people who were involved in the KKK, who were involved in eugenics, who were involved in all those kind of things, he became a respected part of this community for his role as a lifeguard. So it was a really interesting book. The way that Ruby came to this story and the way that she talks about how her own prejudices, both for and against different people and different groups of people, affected this book was really, really fascinating. Something she talks about a lot is how there are many instances where Seraphim was racist against Asian Canadians, and there was a lot of Asian racism at the time in Canada, in Vancouver, and how he perpetuated that. And she struggles with the idea of how can this Latinx Trinidadian man perpetuate racism? Like, how could that be possible? And so I think that's like a really interesting conversation that she has in this book. Something that I've never seen an audiobook do before was that the pictures were described. So if you are sight impaired, this would be a really good audiobook, or if like me, you don't have the physical book, it did describe every picture that was in the book and the captions of the pictures that were in the book. There are a lot of notes, which I found a little bit confusing because it did say when the notes ended, but it didn't say when the notes started. So sometimes a sentence would seem like a very, very long run-on sentence, run-on paragraph, but it was actually just that there had been 4 or 5 notes in one paragraph. I thought that was a little bit confusing, but overall I thought it was a really good audiobook. A really interesting historical figure that I've never heard of, and a Canadian book. I seem to be reading quite a few Canadian books this week. The last book that I read so far in March, I Need You to Read This by Jessa Maxwell. A couple of years ago, last year, I read The Golden Spoon by Jessa Maxwell, and it wasn't great. It was her debut novel. I guess they're more thrillers, but that one felt more like a cozy mystery. The Golden Spoon is sort of a murder mystery set on the Great British Bake Off, but in Vermont. I Need You to Read This is more of a American contemporary thriller. So think Kate Alice Marshall. Think, who's the one that I don't like? Stacey Willingham. Think any of those interchangeable white female authors writing thrillers about New York, about the East Coast, about California. You know, like, that's what this is. But it was very fun. Like, I wanted to read this. I read it all in one day, basically. I read it on audio. I read it at like 2.25 speed, which is very fast for me because the reader was so slow and because the plot was so simple and because the writing was so simple and because the book was so rudimentary. And I don't mean to say that in a bad way. I mean to say it in that it was a very fun, fast-paced, silly thriller, easy to read, pretty much all in one setting, not long, under 300 pages. The characters were interesting. It did have a little of that contemporary thriller trope that I do not like, which is like a unreliable narrator because she drinks, because she's an alcoholic, which I really, really hate that they do women like that in these kind of thrillers, that they like portray women that way, that they portray alcoholics that way. But it didn't ever fully go there. It didn't ever do exactly that. There were other reasons why our character might be unreliable. And there was definitely those moments in this thriller where you're like, that's so dumb. Like, eye roll, that's so dumb. No one would do that. Obviously, this person would not do that. And then, of course, she does do it. So our main character, Alex, is establishing her life in New York. We know that she's been there for a while. We know that she's finally becoming a regular at the coffee shop across the street from her apartment. We know that she mostly works from home. We also know that she loves to read the Dear Constance column in the local Herald newspaper. And we know right off the bat, the woman who wrote Dear Constance has passed away, was actually murdered in her beach home. When the newspaper does a call for a new Dear Constance, Alex sort of hesitantly decides to apply for the job, and she does apply for the job and she gets the job. So the majority of this is Alex learning her new job and working and reading the letters that come in to the newspaper for Dear Constance. And then of course there's a mystery. Obviously the woman who was there before her has been murdered, and Alex decides that she needs to find out why that was and who done it. And then we meet a cast of characters and blah, 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 blah. But like, there was definitely some things that were just so obvious, so incredibly obvious, and the twists were pretty obvious. Like, there are those kind of twists that could have gone one way or the other way and they went one way, but you just don't care. It's not that I wasn't invested in it, it's just that it's so silly, but it was super fun and it was super easy to read and it was silly. And I think after I read The Golden Spoon, I said I would not read another Jessa Maxwell, but I found this in a little free library and I read it, and I do think that the writing voice improved and some of the aspects of this were much better than The Golden Spoon. So I think I would try the next Jessa Maxwell. If I can read it in just a few hours on 2x speed, it was fun. If you're interested in something like that, you might want to give this one a try. So those are 6 more books that I read in March, and I'll come back to you next week to talk more about more books. Let me know what you think I should title this series, what you think I should call this. Should I call it What I Read Last Week? Should I call it Recent Reads? What I Read in a Week? Should I call it Reading Wrap Up? Like, I don't know. What makes the most sense to you? I'll probably mess around with the title and mess around with the thumbnails to see what I like over the next month or so. Please let me know if you've read any of the books that I mentioned here and what you thought of them. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.